In this Game Day Concepts video, I'm going to discuss the topic of coaching competitors. And what I mean by that is coaching two or more lifters of comparable strengths who are lifting directly against each other in the same competition. Hopefully by now, you've watched my game day analysis video of the 110 kilo Clash of the Titans at the recent 2023 USAPL Raw Nationals in Memphis, Tennessee. If you haven't, I want to strongly encourage you to watch that video first and then come back and watch this one, as it's likely going to make a lot more sense. I was blessed to watch the 110 kilo session live because it was one of the very few sessions where I didn't have any lifters competing. So I literally had a front row seat and watched this entire competition unfold. And immediately after the competition, I went back into the warm-up room and I ran up and approached Ashton and Bob to congratulate them on their performance. And I told them, I said, hey, I'm going to be doing a game day analysis video. And they were excited about it and said, yeah, man, green light, and look forward to watching it. And then shortly after I returned home from Nationals, I saw Marcellus's story on Instagram, and specifically where he was addressing and answering questions about what it's like to coach two lifters like an Ashton and a Bob who are going head-to-head at the same competition. And I immediately thought to myself, man, I've always wanted to ask him that same question because I would be interested in his perspective. And then once he shared his opinion and his viewpoint, I said to myself, man, I have a very different viewpoint and an opposing perspective, if you will. So I started thinking about how I might respond, and I thought, I could respond in an Instagram story, I could respond in a DM, and then I started thinking, wow, maybe I can create some longer form educational content, if you will. So I reached out to Marcellus directly and told him that I was going to make a video, or I was thinking of making a video of sharing my perspective and why it is that I feel differently. I also just wanted to do it in a respectful manner. So I emailed Marcellus, Ashton, and Bob because I wanted to take the temperature of the room. I wanted to inform them of my intentions. And essentially, I just wanted to ask for their permission first and their blessing. They all obliged my request. They responded favorably. And here we are. So what I want you to know, first of all, if you're watching this video, there's a few things you should know. This is not a call-out video. This is not me throwing shade at anyone. This is not me questioning anybody's ethics, integrity, nor their coaching practices. I do think highly of Marcellus as a coach and a colleague, and I respect what he's been able to accomplish with all of his lifters in team craftsmanship. Clearly, they have done quite well. I've had the good fortune to coach against Marcellus and win, and I've also coached against him and lost. So with all of that being said, while you can't characterize this video as any of those things I just mentioned, what you can characterize it as is an opinion piece. I'm only speaking for two people, myself and my wife, Susie Hartwig-Gary, which is SSPT. And this is the way that we choose to do things. It doesn't make us right. It doesn't make us wrong. And it doesn't make us better than anyone else, nor worse than anyone. It is simply what we believe to be the best, most ethical, fairest, objective, and professional way of coaching two or more lifters of similar strengths when they are going head-to-head in competition. I told Marcellus directly that my hope is that this video becomes an educational tool for aspiring and established coaches where you can see varying approaches and then you can decide which one you prefer, or perhaps even better, you can take bits and pieces of our own recipe and then create your own. So I certainly don't want to speak for Marcellus, but with SSPT, we provide mentorship to a lot of aspiring coaches. I had coaches shadowing me at Nationals this year, as we've done before at Nationals and at the Arnold. And we truly believe that one of the best ways for your legacy to be carried on is through establishing a coaching tree. And so while we're not necessarily trying to convert or proselytize anyone, we are trying to pay it forward. We do believe that our philosophy is a worthy one, and we do believe in the way that we go about things. So it adds value to us and to our lives when we are able to pay that forward. So ultimately, the good thing is that you may listen to this video and follow Marcellus and follow what we do, and you may even find a better way for you and your lifters. So what I want to start by doing is sharing Marcellus's Instagram story in its entirety, just in case you missed it. And also, so I don't misquote, misrepresent, or mischaracterize him. After his story, I'm going to review the main points and break down some common ground where we agree, and then some areas where we differ. And I think what you'll find nowadays with powerlifting coaches is that if you were to survey a lot of people in the powerlifting community, you would find that a lot of coaches, we have a lot more common ground and commonality than we do differences. So if I sat down with Marcellus and we were to discuss coaching philosophy, habits, practices, intention, our belief systems, etc., I'm sure that we would agree on probably 90% of stuff, and it's just a very small amount of things and details that we disagree upon. This just happens to be one of them. So, like I said, after I share his story, we're going to come back. I'm going to review the main points, and then we'll break down common ground areas and then some areas of differing opinion. So now, without any further ado, let's take a listen to what Marcellus had to say on this topic.
Clarification, not even just for this scenario, but I get asked about this a lot in terms of like, how do I go about handling both Bob and Ashton when they're going head to head, whether it was this time in a weight class battle or at the pro meets for dots, or even when it's multiple lifters like Bob, Ashton, Petrie, all going at the same time for dots, whatever it may be. And honestly, it's really not, I don't know, I guess to me, it's not something that's that difficult, right? Because they all have their game plans, right? We have their game plans, we have their attempts. They, one person doesn't know about the other person's plan. All they know is what they know from each other based off what they discuss between each other or from scouting each other, because I don't tell one person about the other as far as the plan, just to be fair and to be objective, right? But we have our game plans. And from there, the goal is to just set them both up for the most potential success by the time we get to deadlifts. So when it comes to the squats, I don't have one worrying about the other. It's just, hey, Ashton, what can we squat today? Bob, what can we squat today? We make the smart calls on the squat. We do the same thing with the bench press. And then we get to the deadlifts. That's when the back and forth happens. So, of course, they have their openers, they have their seconds. But what I already have in place is contingencies for both. I already have plans in place if Ashton misses his second and Bob so has to be pulling after him of what we can do. I already have plans in place. If Bob misses a second and Ashton pulls after him, what we can do. If we put something in for the third, right, and we don't have a certain amount of changes, I discuss what Bob wants to do in the moment, we put it in. I discuss what Ashton wants to do in the moment, we put it in. And it becomes this thing where if one of them misses, the person who goes next, I already have a change set immediately. Like whether I have Christian or if somebody in the workroom, I have them ready to put that in immediately. So when we get to deadlifts and Ashton has put in what he wants for his third, right? Which is in his mind, it's like, hey, put what the most you think I can do to secure the win. So we put that in. At that point, it then is up to Bob to be like, okay, what do you want to put in for your third? Do you want to put in something that you think you can hit where you're expecting Ashton to miss? Or do you want to put something in where you're expecting Ashton to make it so you can outpull him, right? And of course, Bob being Bob, he's expecting Ashton to make it. He's not going to plan for Ashton to miss. So that's what we have in. But just in case Ashton does miss, like I said, I already had Christian have the card ready to drop Bob down by 3 kg so that if Ashton misses, Bob can capitalize on that, right? But when Ashton hit his third, even though he got it, it was 2 reds. So I went to go test that. So at that point, Christian knows not to put the card in until after we find out for sure if Ashton's pull was going to be overturned or not. Because it's like, okay, if it's a fail, then yeah, we want to drop Bob's. But if they do overturn it and they give it to him, then Bob has to keep the same weight, right? So that's what it was. They ended up having Ashton, not overturning Ashton's pull. So it stayed 2 red lights. But while that was happening, they were already having Bob's weight loaded and having him get ready to go. And then when they're about to say like, oh no, we're doing the change, they then try to tell us that it was too late at that point, even though when you go back, it actually wasn't, because the weight that we were dropping it to was still above what Ashton had on the bar. So it should have been allowed. But with everything that was going on, how fast-paced everything was, I just feel with everything going on, how fast-paced it was, mine was like a 7-person flight. I think there's just a lot going on for both the judges, the jury, the technicians, the people at the desk where you put the attention. There's just a lot going on, and I think that's why in their mind they're like, "Oh no, it's too late to change," even though technically it wasn't. Mind you, in Bob's mind, it doesn't even matter because in Bob's mind, it's like, "Hey, I should be able to pull that regardless." And in Bob's mind, if it wasn't for all the back and forth interruptions, he could have just gone for it on the first time. He would have been good for it. So there's no like issues there as far as him feeling like, oh, I got robbed or whatever. That's just not that type of mentality Bob has. But that's pretty much the breakdown, right? It's like I set them both up for success. And if one makes a mistake, I let the other capitalize on that, regardless of who makes the mistake first, because that's the only fair, objective thing to do. When you're putting in the person's attempt right then and there, you have to treat them like you're trying to set them up for the win in that moment, regardless of what you just did for the previous person. That's it. And lastly, I tell people all the time, if Ashton ever came to me and said, "Hey man, I want so-and-so to handle me instead," or if Bob ever came to me and said, "Hey, I want so-and-so to handle me instead," I would have zero issue with that. Because at the end of the day, I want my clients to do what's best for them on meet day. But they both trust me. And thus far, the way we go about things, it works. They know I'm going to set them both up for success. And at the end of the day, it's just, hey, play the game and may the best man win, may the stronger man on the day win. And honestly, that's part of what I love about working with them because it's very easy because of the type of personalities, mentalities they have. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, it's one of those things where, yeah, if a miss happens, we'll take advantage of it. But Ashton doesn't want Bob to miss. Bob doesn't want Ashton to miss. They just want to outright be stronger than the other guy. And I love
Now
that.
that you've watched Marcellus's Instagram story, I want to present to you the 6 take-home points that he mentioned. And I kind of want to go through these one by one and then find areas of common ground or areas where perhaps we disagree. So one of the very first points that Marcellus made was that the game plans are established in advance. Obviously, that makes perfect sense. I'm on board with that one. No one knows the other lifters' plans except Marcellus. I agree. I'm sure that he does that in private with each of them and does not reveal the other lifters' intentions. And I believe him. I believe that he's telling the truth. So I'm on board with that one as well. That makes a lot of sense. Number 3. His chief objective as a coach is to set each lifter up for success. I'm 100% in agreement with that. I mentioned this in my game day coaching manual. If you were to distill the art of coaching or the singular role of a coach into one sentence, it is to put your athlete or put your pupil, your student, in the best position to succeed. So yes, I'm on board with that one as well. These next 3 take-home points that Marcellus makes, this is where things begin to get a little bit fuzzy for me and where I disagree. Marcellus says that he has contingency cards ready for each lifter. And these are essentially attempt cards or plans that he has in his mind or written down on paper, contingency plans. And they're basically if this, then that types of scenarios. So if Bob makes this lift, then Ashton should do that. If Ashton misses this lift, then Bob should take that. Marcellus also goes on to say that he works for each lifter in that specific moment. So when Ashton is lifting, he has Ashton's best interests at heart. And when Bob is lifting, he has Bob's best interests at heart. The issue there is that when you have one lifter's best interests at heart, you don't also have the other lifter's best interests at heart. What I mean by that is that in the game day analysis video, you will notice that after Ashton's 3rd deadlift attempt with 388.5 kilos, it was turned down by the referees 2-1. Ashton turned around and immediately requested that Marcellus go protest. And you can tell on the video, and I saw it live in person, that Marcellus hesitated just briefly for a moment before running over to the scorer's table. And I don't know all the behind the scenes action, and I'm not privy to every single nugget of information. But if he's hesitating, even for just a split second, that means he's beginning to question himself as to whether or not I should go protest this, to advocate for Ashton. And so, matter of factly, when he goes to the jury table and protests, he is an advocate for Ashton. In doing so, he's actually going against Bob because it's not in Bob's best interests for that lift to be overturned. And similarly, if he were advocating for Bob, he is therefore essentially going against Ashton. So I can't really get on board with these two take-home points. Finally, he says, may the stronger lifter win. Well, I firmly believe that he wants that to happen. And I believe that Ashton and Bob both want that to happen. I do not question their motives. I do not question their integrity. They all strike me as morally upright and upstanding individuals, and I take them at their word. I do genuinely believe that Ashton and Bob are both so alpha that they want to prove to one another who is the strongest person. And matter of factly, they want to be essentially the one lifting last. And I believe that in this scenario, in the 110 kilo class, where they went to head, not like it was at the Arnold where they were competing on dots and they weighed in differently. That was completely different. But in this particular instance, I both genuinely believe, or I believe that both genuinely want to lift more weight and they want to go last. In that particular instance, however, it removes all the gamesmanship and it removes the sport, if you will, because then it essentially turns into a max out day or a test day. And so powerlifting as a sport, because we are only given 3 attempts per discipline, it turns it into a game. It doesn't turn it into a max out test. And so I can't essentially get on board with that one either. So you'll notice in the 6 take-home points, I agree with about 50% of what Marcellus said. And then I have a varying viewpoint on the final 3. And so what I would like to do now is distill all of this information and present to you where I think the game day coach can improve and do better and better serve their athletes. So now that we've reviewed the take-home points from Marcellus's Instagram story, sharing his perspective, what I want to do is share my perspective with you. If I were to distill this down into a single sentence, I would say this: as a game day coach for powerlifting, you can't play chess against yourself. When you're coaching 2 lifters that are going head-to-head in the same competition, I believe you can remain objective through the squat and the bench press. But once the deadlift begins, that is the strategy portion, the point in the competition where the game actually begins, all objectivity is then lost and everything becomes subjective. Powerlifting is an individual sport like boxing, mixed martial arts, golf, tennis. And in those sports, like boxing and mixed martial arts, you won't see 2 fighters with the same coach. That is to say that in between rounds, you won't see one coach going from one corner to the next and giving each fighter advice. I mean, imagine that. You tell one fighter, hey, when you drop your guard, your opponent is going to hit you with the right hook. And then you go over and you tell the other person the exact opposite so that they know what's coming. I mean, it makes no sense at all. Likewise, golfers don't share caddies. I can't think of a single individual sport where the top ranked contender, or essentially the number 2 ranked player, is also coached by the champion's coach. It just doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to sit here and question why Marcellus coaches both of these guys. I know that their situation is unique. He's been coaching Ashton longer, and then Bob comes into the mix, and Ashton has intentionally run 2 competition, not away from it, and I applaud him for that. And likewise with Bob, they have both shifted weight classes, and I think they both wanted this. They both wanted to compete head-to-head directly against one another, so their situation is unique. More often nowadays, you see competitors actually running from each other, or at least ducking their opposition until a point in which it becomes favorable for them to meet. So I'm not insinuating that with Bob and Ashton at all. Suffice it to say, it's just no matter that how much a coach claims that they can remain objective and impartial, they'll eventually have to play a favorite to one of the lifters. It's kind of analogous to having your two favorite ice cream flavors. If you say that you love mint chocolate chip just as much as you love chocolate chip cookie dough, and you eat them equally in equal amounts and doses, and you love them just as much, ultimately, if I put a gun to your head, you're going to have to pick one of the ice cream flavors. And I know that this is a powerlifting competition and nobody's holding a gun to your head, but the 60-second clock essentially mandates, it forces you to choose. It forces you to make a decision in favor of one lifter. And when you're making a decision in favor of one lifter, you're actually can be going against the other lifter. So let me put it another way. It's pretty well-known fact and documented that at SSPT, we no longer write training for powerlifters. We believe in staying in our own lane, playing to our strengths, and game day coaching is our passion. That's what gets our motor running the most. It's what we feel we're best at. And it's one of the reasons why I wrote a book on it, why I wrote my game day coaching manual. It's also a reason why a lot of top-ranked lifters, excuse me, seek us out specifically for our acumen, our 2+ decades of experience at the international level, and specifically our expertise. So case in point, I just coached 12 lifters, 4 in primetime at USA Powerlifting Raw Nationals. And I don't write training for a single one of those lifters. So every one of those lifters paid me directly for game day coaching. So imagine if while I'm coaching those people who paid me, I'm then running across the warm-up room and I'm helping another lifter warm up, I'm helping another lifter get ready, and then I'm submitting their attempts. And then when it comes down to deadlift time, where all the strategy comes into play, I'm making calculations and attempt selections for both parties. That makes no sense, and I suspect that the people who paid me, my clients, would be furious. So, in my opinion, Marcellus is essentially ignoring the entire strategy portion of the game in the sport of powerlifting. He's turning their lifter's day into a 1-rep max test and then leading them through the assessment. And we all know that this sport has risen to such a level where it's no longer a max out day. In yesteryear, when the talent pool wasn't as deep, and we know that a high tide raises all boats, but the weight classes weren't as deep, and there weren't these head-to-head battles, and there weren't 4 or 5 lifters fighting for podium spots in various weight classes. It was, matter of factly, probably the strongest lifter on the day who could come in and win. They could make 4 or 5 lifts and be crowned the champion, but that's just not true anymore. And so even if the lifters agreed upon it in advance, I don't feel like it's fair to them, because if they truly wanted to see who was the strongest, I'd encourage them to meet at a gym and weigh in and have 3 people judging them and just take unlimited attempts to find their maxes. Even let a lifter miss an attempt in case they misgrouped it and then go again. And then you could truly find out their 1 RM. But because we're only afforded 3 attempts per discipline, this is truly a sport. And it's truly a game. And so, gosh, if you want to test your 1-rep maxes, do what I said, go to a gym, live stream it. You could live stream it for charity or even for profit. And I imagine you have quite the audience. I know I tune in. But when you're coaching 2 lifters head to head, you're really not playing the game at all. I've been quoted as saying many times before that the only luck in powerlifting is your lot number. And it's true. After all, that's how lot numbers got their name. The word lot comes from the word lottery, where numbers were either literally drawn out of a hat, or nowadays, because competition rosters are so huge, meet directors typically will take the roster and dump it into an Excel document and then do a random sort to assign the lot numbers. So in either case, whether you're drawing out of a hat or using a random sort in Excel, your lot number is literally and figuratively 100% luck. And in the case of Ashton and Bob, whomever has the lot number advantage and happens to get the last call can capitalize on the other person's potential miss, and they therefore have the advantage. And while I definitely think that both of these guys want to prove who's stronger than the other guy, they truly want to outlift the other person, I don't think that because they've chosen this competition format that they want that to end because of a coin flip, because of some random lot number. In the case of Ashton's squat, his squat is stronger than Bob's, but Bob's bench is stronger than Ashton's, and those almost cancel out each other, and then their deadlifts are virtually equal depending upon the day. So it could, in theory, literally come down to whoever has the highest lot number, which is total luck. It's essentially a coin flip. It's a random assignment. It could come out to who has the higher lot number. And I don't think either one of these guys wants it to be luck. They want to prove that they're stronger. And back to what I said earlier about Marcellus hesitating after Ashton's deadlift miss. At some point, you've got to decide in favor of one of them. And if you hesitate, even for just a split second, you really end up hurting both parties. And then when you go protest and you're advocating for one lifter, you're essentially going against the other one. So this is not necessarily a question of ethics or integrity or morals or values or principles. It's to say that it is human nature. And at some point, you're going to have to pick one and play favorites. As I've clearly stated, I believe that coaching two competitors going head-to-head against each other in the same weight class creates some issues and some problems. Number one, I just don't think it's fair. If you're for one, you're essentially against another. And I don't believe that you can remain objective all the way through the competition. So it removes objectivity and lends itself and leads to subjectivity. Eventually, one of the primary roles of a game day powerlifting coach is to remain objective, to remain unemotional, to not get caught up in your feelings. The only emotional attachment I have is to the number that I feel my lifter is capable of on the day. I don't get caught up in records. I don't get caught up in personal bests. And I have no emotional attachment to those numbers, because if I have an emotional attachment to them, like my client does or like my lifter does, then I'm getting caught up in the moment, and I'm going to succumb to the emotions and to the feelings of the movement and not be able to best serve them with my expertise and in calling the correct attempt. So when you're coaching two people head to head, you can no longer be objective, and it leads to subjectivity and to playing favorites, which goes hand in hand. So number two goes hand in hand with number four, because it forces the coach to ultimately make a choice. You have to play a favorite. And when you do that, if a coach doesn't choose, then all strategy is lost. We all know that coaches have to make attempt selections under a 60-second clock. And so if you don't submit an attempt and the lift was successful prior, the next weight goes up to 2.5 kilos. If the lift was unsuccessful and you don't submit an attempt in 60 seconds, then the bar remains the same. The load remains the same. So if the coach quite simply throws their hands up in the air and doesn't choose, then all strategy is lost. But if they do make a choice, they're essentially choosing for one lifter and essentially against the other. So all of this, as I said here in number three, reduces and removes the gamesmanship and strategy component, because you cannot matter-of-factly be an advocate for both lifters simultaneously. And ultimately, I believe that this potentially fosters an environment of animosity, because eventually you're going to be forced into a situation where you're going to play favorites, and the one who is not favored, the unfavored lifter, if you will, the one who is playing second fiddle to the other one, is ultimately going to catch feelings and get their feelings hurt and be disappointed, and that can really ruin relationships. So while I've presented you with a host of problems or things that I believe are issues, I do feel obligated to present you with some solutions. So looking at what I feel to be our potential solutions, first and foremost, the easiest way is to just say, nope, I'm not going to do it. I'm quite simply not going to coach two people against one another. I'm only going to coach one. If you're absolutely confronted with the choice of having to choose and you're coaching two lifters on your roster, let's say, this unique situation, then I would say that probably the fairest way, the most ethical way to choose would be to coach the one who is most senior, the one that has the most tenure with you, that you've been working with the longest. That seems to be, in my mind's eye, the fairest way to do it. I think a better way would be to simply split the coaching duties. If you have other coaches on your staff, or if you know of other game day coaches that you know, you simply employ their services. You have them coach the lifters. You install the competition game plans, and then you hand off the game plans to those coaches. And all the while, you can provide some objective oversight from afar if there becomes a question in terms of what they feel like their lifter's ability is. But you just remove yourself from the gamesmanship aspect, and you just split the coaching duties, having two separate coaches for each, one separate coach for each lifter. And then finally, I guess a less favorable alternative would be to coach both lifters objectively up through the subtotal and then hand them off to a game day coach, split the coaching duties come time for the deadlift. But in my view, I'd almost rather sit on the sidelines the entire time because, the most fun part of the competition is the deadlift, is when the game begins, when the bar hits the floor. That's what they say. The meet doesn't start until the bar hits the floor. So I would want to be part of that. So rather than tease myself, I would probably recuse myself from all of that entirely and just split the coaching duties. I think that is the fairest and best solution. So let me give you some examples of where I have employed that exact strategy and why I believe that it was a good one and was ethical and fair at the time. So in terms of coaching competitors, I want to give you 5 examples here, right, of where there was no conflict of interest. So in 2013 at IPF Classic Raw Worlds in Russia, I was an assistant coach on the staff. Angela Simons was the head coach, and I was an assistant. And I was the personal game day coach for both Mike Tushir and Mike Hedleski. And they wound up placing 2nd and 8th, respectively. And so their strengths were so far apart that literally there was no conflict of interests. I was able to make decisions for Mike Tushir that were not conflicting or going against Mike Hedleski, and the opposite was true for Mike Hedleski. And that worked out quite well for both of them. Mike Tushir ended up placing 2nd, and actually Mike Hedleski got gold in the deadlift. Likewise, in 2014, South Africa, I was an assistant coach again under head coach Angela Simons, and my wife Susie was competing against fellow American 52 kilo Marisa Inda. And while they both seemed to place pretty closely here, you see Susie came in 4th and Marisa came in 5th. There was a 20 kilo gap in strength there, and that's a lot at 52 kilos body weight. That's a pretty huge gap. So there was no conflict of interest there. I was making decisions for Susie and then making decisions for Marisa, and each of those decisions was made in each lifter's own best interests. Later in that competition, I coached for the very first time Ray Williams, and then I had a personal client, Matt Bowler from Alaska, whom I coached, and I actually wrote the training for Matt, and I was able to coach both of those lifters on game day, and there was no conflict of interest because the only area where Matt was stronger than Ray was in the bench press. Matt went on to set an IPF world record bench press at that competition, but Ray went on to set a squat world record and a total world record and placed first, and then Matt placed 5th. So again, no conflict of interest there. So I was able to coach 2 people competing in the same weight class, but because they're not of relative strengths, they're not essentially competing head-to-head per se. In 2016, in Killeen, Texas, my wife Susie was the head coach of the U.S. Raw national team, and we had Lisa Rothman and Heather Connor. And I'm sorry, I have those backwards. It should say Heather Connor was first, and then Lisa Rothman was second. And, I'm careful to say here, Heather Connor and Lisa Rothman. It's not as though Heather Connor was going versus Lisa Rothman, but you see, Heather Connor placed second and Lisa placed sixth. And my wife, Susie, I believe, oversaw that session. And so again, there was no conflict of interest. And then likewise in the 120 kilo plus division, again, we had Ray Williams, a lifter that at that time I had begun writing training for, so he was my lifter. And then James Healy, no conflict of interests, huge strength disparity. Ray placed first and James placed fifth. Now, I want to give you 7 examples where, yeah, there was a conflict of interest. So in 2017, my wife was the head coach of the U.S. Raw national team in Belarus. And my wife actually made the team. And at the time, essentially the torch had been passed in the 52 kilos where, Susie used to be the dominant force and was stronger. But now it had shifted to Marisa. But we were in a situation where if Marisa came in and had a bad day, Susie could have snuck onto the podium, so to speak. So while they were kind of far apart, if Marisa had a bad day, Susie could creep up on her. So I ended up coaching my wife, Susie, and then Paulie Steinman, who was the Masters team coach, ended up coaching Marisa. So we split the 2 lifters. As I said, we split the coaching duties, and Marisa went on to win and had a good day. And my wife, Susie, went 9 for 9, hit a world record in the squat, but again, placed 5th because none of the top-ranked lifters essentially dropped the ball. But we wanted to do everything above board, promote integrity and ethics and fairness. And so we split the coaching duties. Likewise, in Belarus, 93 kilos, I coached LS McLean and Susie coached Dave Ricks. They came in 1st and 6th, respectively. LS wound up winning, but on paper, before the competition, they were very closely matched. In fact, if David had made 3 squats, he in all likelihood would have been on the medal stand. So that is to say, we didn't want to present a conflict of interest. And so I ended up coaching LS and Susie coached Dave. Later in that competition, again, Belarus, same situation, Bryce Lewis and Garrett Blevins. I ended up coaching Bryce Lewis along with Dr. Eric Helms. We kind of co-coached Bryce. My wife oversaw that. And then Henny Gisarli of TSA coached Garrett Blevins. And they wound up placing 2nd and 3rd, respectively. Again, in 2018, Canada, Calgary, Jennifer Thompson and Sam Calhoun. I wound up coaching Sam Calhoun, and Jennifer's husband, Donovan, wound up coaching her because they were so closely linked, and they wound up placing 1st and 2nd. Garrett Blevins and Bryce Lewis, again, while they placed 2nd and 3rd in Belarus, the following year, Bryce won, and Garrett came in 2nd. So again, because they were so closely linked, once again, I coached Bryce with the help of Dr. Eric Helms, and then, of course, Garrett was coached by Hanny. So we wanted to be ethical, above board, fairness, all those things. We split the lifters. This year, earlier, at Powerlifting America Nationals, Chance Mitchell had reached out to me because I had coached him in 2022 at Powerlifting America Nationals, and he said, hey, man, let's run it back. Can you coach me at Powerlifting America Nationals in 2023? And I said, of course. And then lo and behold, later, Bryce Lewis, whom I've been coaching on game day at every significant competition since 2015 Nationals in Scranton, I believe it was, Pennsylvania. Bryce Lewis reached out to me. This was after the fact. I had already accepted to work with Chance. I had no idea that Bryce was going to come to Powerlifting America Nationals. So when Bryce approached me, I said, hey, man, can't do it. It just doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to coach both of you. So I'm going to coach Chance. And Susie agreed to coach Bryce. Now, lo and behold, Chance Mitchell withdrew, didn't wind up competing. But once again, we wanted to do everything above board. We didn't want there to be a conflict of interest. So I had on paper agreed to coach Chance, and Susie would have coached Bryce. And that would have been an awesome opportunity where Susie and I would have been able to coach against each other, and we would have not shared any of the plans together. We would have done everything above board and remained, ethically sound. Lastly, and most recently, in the 82.5 kilo weight class at the recent USAPL Raw Nationals, I coached Chris Perez. The reason that I have Sean Noriega in parentheses, Chris Perez, who is a national champion contender here, used to be coached by Sean Noriega. Sean used to write his training. And I don't know all of the details. I believe their split was amicable, but I believe that one of the main reasons why Chris left Sean's tutelage was he didn't feel like being coached by a direct competitor. Now, lo and behold, Chris started getting programming from Joe Stanek of Game Day Barbell. Well, as you know, Joe Stanek is the coach for Angelo Fortino. So Chris reached out to me and said, hey, Joe Stanek writes my training. How can we do this ethically? And he thought, I'm going to hire Matt Gary at SSPT. So Chris Perez hired me, and I wound up coaching Chris. And then, of course, Joe coached Angelo. Angelo wound up winning, and Chris placed third. But we wanted to do everything above board. And I'll take it a step further. So I invited Joe Stanek in on our strategy call and to install Chris's game plan. And when we did, Joe was on the call for the first 15 to 20 minutes, told me all about Chris's training, verified what I'd known via video, etc. It said, this is what I think Chris is capable of, and basically said, I'm going to recuse myself from the remainder of the conversation. And he left. And then Chris and I installed the competition game plan. And that way, Joe had zero knowledge whatsoever of what our game plan was going to be going against Angelo. So, as I said, 5 examples up here where there was no conflict of interests, and I was the game day coach for both of these lifters. And that's why I said, I used the ampersand. In other words, I was coaching Mike Tushir and Mike Hedleski. Down here, I was intentional to put verses because each one of these lifters was essentially going against the other because there would be a conflict of interests and their relative strength levels are so strikingly similar that I believed the fairest way to do it was to split the coaches. In closing, I believe that there are certain popular powerlifting coaches, not named Marcellus Williams, and I'm not going to name names specifically, but some of whom have created cult-like communities and followings who exude such hubris that they would never be willing to remove themselves from the spotlight. They always want to be in front of the camera and the live stream. That's why if given the opportunity for their lifters to have 2 separate game day coaches, they remain in the fray and end up coaching both. And I would just say to them, shame on you. Your efforts should always be in the favor of your lifter, of your athlete, of your pupil, your student, not in favor of gaining more followers. My biggest fear is that when coaching 2 competitors against each other, in the examples that I've provided, as the stakes rise, so does the potential for fallout. So can you imagine how this might play out if 2 of Marcellus's lifters, and I'm just using Marcellus as an example, this could be any coach who has 2 rivals or 2 lifters competing head to head. Can you imagine if they were to make a national team, a U.S. national team, and lift head to head, competing against one another at an IPF World Championship? Only one person can be an IPF World Champion, and there's only one day out of the year when you can become a world champion. And in my opinion, that would be awful if it didn't play out as fairly as possible. Taking it a step further, imagine if this happened at competitions like the Sheffield, or worse yet, a step further, the World Games that only comes around once every 4 years like the Olympics. It just wouldn't be fair for the coach to have to choose which athlete to coach. And likewise, it wouldn't be fair for the lifters to be coached by the same person. I believe that could potentially permanently damage, or worse yet, ruin these friendships and coaching relationships. I'm also not suggesting that if it came to that level that Marcellus wouldn't opt for a different approach. Perhaps he would, and only he can answer that. Lastly, as I said at the start of this video, I respect Marcellus Williams and Team Craftsmanship. I'm sure we agree on a lot more than we disagree. And that goes for any other coaches out there who choose to coach competitors going against each other. It's just not my flavor and not my choice. The bottom line is that ostensibly Marcellus, Ashton, and Bob all have an agreement, they're on the same page, and it works for them. And they should probably continue to employ that strategy until they no longer feel comfortable with it. I hope this video has been informative and helpful for you in terms of making your own game day coaching decisions. And like I said at the start, take bits and pieces from our recipe, add in some of your own practices, and develop your own coaching system that works best for you and your athletes. Lastly, if you want to learn more about SSPT and how we do things, game day coaching, check out the link below for access to my game day coaching manual. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, share the video, or drop a comment with your feedback or opinion. And as always, thank you for watching.